Welcome. Find a comfortable position. Let the weight of the day begin to dissolve. Tonight, we're not shying away from the big questions. Instead, we'll gently cradle them, exploring the deep, sometimes unsettling mysteries of consciousness itself. We won't find all the answers, perhaps none at all, but the journey through these 100 conundrums is designed to quiet the busy mind, replacing anxieties with wonder, paradoxically finding peace in the profound uncertainty. Let your thoughts drift as we explore the very nature of your awareness. Let's begin our journey into the labyrinth of mind. The hard problem: why is experience like something? Imagine, just for a moment, that you are tasked with a seemingly impossible mission: to describe the color red to someone who has been blind since birth. You could start with the objective facts, the scientific correlates. You could speak of light waves, specific frequencies hitting the retina, perhaps around 650 nanometers. You could meticulously detail the complex chain reaction this triggers: photons converting to electrical signals in photoreceptor cells, signals traveling along the optic nerve, cascading through intricate neural pathways in the visual cortex, reaching specific processing centers in the brain like V1, V4. You might even map the precise pattern of neuronal firing that corresponds in sighted individuals to the perception of red. You could explain its associations: warmth, fire, passion, warnings, ripe fruit. You could use analogies, perhaps comparing it to the sound of a trumpet or the feeling of warmth on the skin, though knowing these are imperfect bridges at best. You could provide a complete, exhaustive, third-person scientific account of everything physically happening when someone sees red. But after all that intricate explanation, after laying bare the entire physical mechanism, a fundamental question would inevitably linger, hanging heavy and unanswered in the space between you. Have you truly conveyed the experience? Have you communicated the raw, subjective, qualitative feeling, the sheer redness of red? That immediate, undeniable first-person sensation that floods awareness when encountering a poppy field or a setting sun? Almost certainly not. You can describe the container, the wiring, the process, but the content, the actual what its likeness of the experience itself, seems stubbornly resistant to objective description. It feels like trying to capture mist in a net. This profound gap, this chasm between the physical processes and the subjective feeling they somehow produce, is the essence of what philosopher David Chalmers famously termed the hard problem of consciousness. It's the starting point, the fundamental enigma that fuels so much of our exploration tonight. It's the question lurking beneath all the others. Why isn't all this complex processing happening in the dark? Chalmers, in his seminal work, drew a crucial distinction, a line in the sand separating the challenging yet potentially solvable scientific puzzles from this deeper, perhaps fundamentally different kind of mystery. He labeled the former the easy problems of consciousness. Now, easy here is relative. These problems are incredibly complex and occupy thousands of brilliant scientists worldwide. They involve understanding the functions of the brain, the mechanisms by which it achieves its remarkable feats. How does the brain integrate sensory information from different modalities, sight, sound, touch, into a coherent whole? How does it focus attention, filtering out irrelevant stimuli to concentrate on what matters? How are memories encoded, stored, and retrieved? How does the brain control behavior, translating intentions into actions? How do we learn language, recognize faces, or make decisions? These are questions about information processing, about the structural and functional correlates of specific cognitive abilities. Scientists can map the neural circuits involved, identify the neurotransmitters at play, build computational models that mimic these functions. We can observe brain activity using tools like fMRI or EEG and correlate patterns with reported states or tasks. These are problems of explaining how the system works, how it performs its tasks. They are easy only in the sense that we have a clear methodological path forward, even if the journey is long and arduous. We are essentially asking the brain to report its own operations, analyzing its structure and function like any other complex biological system. We can, in principle, imagine a future where we have a complete neuroscientific account of how the brain processes information related to, say, discriminating between stimuli or accessing memories. But then looms the hard problem. It's the question that remains even if, hypothetically, we solved all the easy problems. Even if we had a perfect synapse by synapse map of the brain and understood precisely how every neuron fired during every conceivable mental task, the core question would persist. Why does all this intricate physical processing feel like anything from the inside? Why is there an inner life, a subjective dimension, accompanying these neural fireworks? Why isn't it all just sophisticated computation happening in the dark, devoid of any felt quality, like your laptop solving an equation or a thermostat regulating temperature? A computer can process information about redness, perhaps controlling a robotic arm to pick out red objects, but we generally don't assume the computer experiences the sensation of red. It follows instructions, manipulates data, but lacks that internal, private, subjective glow. Why are we different? Why does the electrochemical fizzing in the wetware of our brains give rise to the taste of coffee, the sting of regret, the warmth of affection, the simple awareness of breathing? This is the crux of the hard problem. It's not about function, but about experience. It's about the leap from objective physical processes to subjective first-person awareness. This subjective, qualitative feel of experience has a technical name in philosophy: qualia, singular quale. Qualia are the raw feels, the what-it's-like aspects of our mental states. The bitterness of unsweetened chocolate, the specific ache of a headache behind your eyes, the vibrant hue of turquoise, the sound of a cello, the feeling of nostalgia, triggered by an old photograph. These are all examples of qualia. They are the textures of our inner world, the irreducible qualities that make up the fabric of conscious experience. When we ask why processing feels like something, we are asking why qualia exist at all. Why does the brain generate this rich tapestry of subjective sensation? It seems almost gratuitous from a purely functional perspective. Couldn't an organism theoretically navigate the world, react to stimuli, process information, and even exhibit complex behavior without this inner light show? This is the idea behind the philosophical concept of a zombie, a hypothetical being physically and behaviorally identical to a conscious human, but lacking any subjective experience whatsoever. It would talk, react, function just like us, but inside it would be dark. The hard problem asks, why aren't we philosophical zombies? What is it about our physical constitution, or perhaps something else entirely, that ignites this inner awareness. The what it's likeness of being you right now, listening to these words, feeling the air on your skin, noticing the thoughts drifting through your mind. That is the heart of the mystery. It's the subjective perspective that seems impossible to capture fully from an objective, third-person viewpoint. The implications of this hard problem are profound and ripple outwards, challenging some of our most fundamental assumptions about the mind, the brain, and reality itself. Primarily, it throws down a gauntlet to a purely physicalist or materialist worldview, the idea that everything in the universe, including consciousness, can ultimately be reduced to and explained by physical matter and its interactions. If subjective experience, if qualia, are fundamentally non-physical or possess properties that cannot be captured by the language of physics and neuroscience, then a purely physical explanation of the mind seems incomplete. How can the objective language of science dealing with mass, charge, location, and firing rates ever fully encompass the subjective quality of seeing red or feeling sad? It seems like trying to explain music using only the principles of mathematics. You can describe the frequencies and amplitudes, but not the emotional resonance, the felt beauty. This suggests an explanatory gap between the physical facts and the experiential facts. We can see the correlations. This brain activity happens when someone reports feeling joy. But correlation isn't explanation. The hard problem demands an explanation for why that specific brain activity should feel like joy, rather than something else, or nothing at all. This challenge forces us to reconsider the relationship between mind and brain. Does consciousness somehow emerge from sufficient neural complexity, like wetness emerges from the interactions of H2O molecules? Wetness isn't a property of a single water molecule, but arises from the collective behavior. Perhaps consciousness is similar, an emergent property of complex biological computation. Yet, emergence itself is often debated. Is consciousness emergent in a weak sense, a novel property, but ultimately reducible to its base components, or a strong sense, a fundamentally new property that cannot be reduced? Even if consciousness emerges, why does this specific kind of complexity, biological neurons arranged in a brain, give rise to experience, while other complex systems, like intricate computer networks or weather patterns, presumably do not? What is the special ingredient? Alternatively, some thinkers, grappling with the seeming impossibility of generating subjective experience from purely physical stuff, propose more radical ideas. Could consciousness be in some way more fundamental than we typically assume? Perhaps it's not something that arises from matter, but is itself a basic constituent of reality, perhaps present even at a very simple level, as we'll explore later when discussing panpsychism. Or maybe our current understanding of physics is incomplete, lacking the concepts needed to bridge the gap between the physical and the mental. These are speculative paths, born from the sheer difficulty the hard problem presents to our standard scientific framework. It pushes us to the very limits of our current understanding. Is your inner world, then, ultimately inexplicable through the tools of objective science alone? Does the first-person perspective represent a domain that science, by its very nature as a third-person endeavor, cannot fully penetrate? This doesn't necessarily mean consciousness is supernatural or mystical, but it might mean that a complete understanding requires integrating subjective reports and first-person methodologies in ways we haven't yet mastered, or perhaps accepting that some aspects of reality are only accessible from the inside. Ponder this gap for a moment. Feel the weight of the question. Why are you experiencing this right now? Don't strive for an answer. Just allow yourself to rest in the vastness of the question itself. Acknowledge the profound mystery inherent in your own awareness, the simple fact that it is like something to be you. Let that sense of wonder deepen as you relax, as you breathe. There's a strange calmness to be found in confronting the truly immense questions, a release in admitting the boundaries of our knowledge. This fundamental mystery, the very existence of subjective experience as posed by the hard problem, naturally leads us to further questions about the nature of that experience. If this inner world exists, this realm of qualia, how can we ever truly know if its contents are the same for different individuals? If the feeling itself is private, inherently first person, how can we bridge the gap not just between the physical and the mental, but between one mind and another? If the existence of experience is the hard problem, the nature of that experience brings its own set of fascinating and perhaps unsettling mysteries. How can we ever truly know if your sensation of it is the same as mine? Let's now gently delve into this private theater of the mind, exploring the conundrum of qualia and the potential isolation of our subjective worlds. Breathe deeply and let your mind drift onward. Qualia. Is your red my blue? Consider the world immediately around you, even with your eyes closed. Perhaps you feel the gentle pressure of the surface beneath you, the specific texture of fabric against your skin. Maybe there's a lingering taste in your mouth, faint but distinct, the ghost of dinner, the mintiness of toothpaste. Listen closely to the quiet sounds, the hum of electronics, the distant murmur of traffic, the sound of your own breathing. Think of a vivid memory, the exact warmth of sunlight during a cherished afternoon, the precise bitter tang of your first taste of coffee, the specific soaring feeling evoked by a piece of music. These raw, immediate subjective qualities of experience, the what it's likeness of seeing crimson, tasting salt, feeling warmth, hearing a melody, experiencing joy or sorrow. These are what philosophers call qualia. They are the atoms of our subjective universe, the irreducible building blocks of our inner life. They feel intensely personal, undeniably real to us. They constitute the very texture of our being conscious. But here lies a profound and perhaps deeply unsettling riddle. How can you ever be truly certain that your internal experience, your qualia, are the same as anyone else's? You assume naturally that when you and a friend both look at a clear summer sky and call it blue, you're both having the same internal color experience. But can you prove it? Can you ever step outside your own mind and directly compare your subjective sensation of blue with theirs? This seemingly simple question opens a door onto one of the most fascinating and persistent thought experiments in the philosophy of mind, one that challenges our assumptions about shared reality and the limits of knowledge, the problem of the inverted spectrum. Let's explore this idea, first perhaps hinted at by John Locke centuries ago and elaborated upon since. Imagine a person, let's call her invert, who was born with a peculiar condition affecting her color vision. From birth, her subjective experience of colors is systematically inverted compared to yours along, say, the red, green, and blue-yellow axes. When invert looks at what you call red, a ripe strawberry, a fire engine, a stop sign, the raw internal sensation she experiences is precisely the one you experience when looking at what you call green, fresh grass, emeralds, a traffic light signaling go. Conversely, when she looks at grass, she experiences the sensation you call red. Similarly, her experience of blue, like the daytime sky, is your sensation of yellow, like a lemon, and her experience of yellow is your sensation of blue. This inversion is consistent and covers the entire spectrum of colors. Now, here is the crucial mind-bending part of the thought experiment. Would we ever be able to tell? Could anyone, including invert herself, ever detect that her internal color experiences are different from everyone else's? Consider how invert learns about the world and language. As a child, she points to a fire engine, experiencing internally what you'd call green. Adults around her say, "That's red." She learns to associate that specific internal sensation, "You're green," with the public word or it. She sees grass, experiencing "You're red," and hears others call it green. So she learns to map the word green onto that particular inner feeling. She does this consistently for all colors. When asked to pick out their red ball, she correctly picks the one that gives her the sensation you call green, because that's the sensation she has learned to label red. She will group color chips just like you, separating their reds from the blues based on her internal discriminations, even though the underlying qualia associated with those labels are inverted relative to yours. She will stop at red traffic lights and go on green ones. She might even talk about it being a warm color and blue being cool, perhaps learning these associations culturally or through other sensory correlations, like red objects often being physically warmer. Her behavior, her language use, her functional responses to color stimuli would be utterly indistinguishable from yours. She would pass every conceivable behavioral test for normal color vision. She could become a painter, an interior designer, a fashion critic, discussing color harmony and contrast with perfect consistency relative to public norms, all while her internal palette is flipped compared to yours. This thought experiment strikes at the heart of attempts to define mental states purely in terms of their functional roles or observable behaviors. Philosophies known as functionalism and behaviorism. If two individuals can be functionally and behaviorally identical with respect to color, yet possess radically different internal qualia, then function and behavior alone cannot capture the whole story of the mind. There is something more to consciousness than just input, output, and the processing in between. There is the subjective feel itself. The inverted spectrum highlights the profound privacy of qualia. Your inner world of sensation seems sealed off, inaccessible to direct inspection by anyone else. We infer the mental states of others based on their behavior and our own experience, assuming a similarity, the principle of charity, perhaps. But the inverted spectrum suggests this assumption, however necessary for practical life, remains just that, an assumption potentially masking vast hidden differences in subjective reality. Why is this private nature so philosophically puzzling? It's because it seems to defy objective analysis. Science thrives on objectivity, on phenomena that can be measured, observed, and verified out by multiple independent investigators. How do you objectively measure the redness of someone's red experience? You can measure the wavelength of light, map their brain activity, record their verbal reports. These are all third-person data points, but the subjective quality itself remains stubbornly first-person. It's like trying to weigh a dream or measure the precise subjective intensity of nostalgia. Our scientific tools are designed for the external world of objects and processes, but qualia constitute the internal world of the subject. This inherent privacy creates what some call an epistemic barrier, a limit to what we can know about other minds. We can know about them, we can study their brains and behavior, but can we ever truly know what it's like to be them, in the same direct way we know our own experience? This line of reasoning extends beyond color. Could your experience of pain be quantitatively or qualitatively different from mine, even if we react similarly? Is the sourness I taste when biting a lemon the same raw sensation you experience? Could the emotional resonance of a piece of music, the specific shade of melancholy or joy it evokes, differ fundamentally between listeners, even if they describe it using similar words? The potential for divergence seems almost endless. Once we admit the privacy of qualia, it challenges the very notion of a perfectly shared objective reality, suggesting instead a multiplicity of private experiential worlds loosely correlated through shared language and behavior. The implications of this deep privacy are worth contemplating as you rest here, letting these thoughts drift. Does this mean we are, in a fundamental sense, isolated within our own experiential worlds? Are we like individual audience members in separate private theaters, watching the same play, the external world, but unable to be certain if the colors, sounds, and emotions projected on our personal screen match anyone else's? This idea can feel lonely, evoking a sense of existential solitude. We strive for connection, for understanding, believing we can truly share experiences with others. Yet the qualia problem suggests a fundamental barrier, a layer of subjective reality forever inaccessible. Think about moments of profound empathy, where you felt you truly understood another's pain or joy. Was this a genuine sharing of feeling, or merely a sophisticated inference based on subtle cues and your own analogous experiences? The possibility that even our deepest connections are built across an unbridgeable gap of subjective difference is a sobering thought. Furthermore, does this inherent subjectivity limit the ultimate scope of a scientific understanding of the mind? If science is confined to the objective, the measurable, the publicly verifiable, can it ever fully encompass the subjective realm of qualia? Neuroscientists are making incredible progress in identifying the neural correlates of consciousness, NCCs, the patterns of brain activity associated with specific conscious experiences. We might find, for example, that a particular pattern of firing in visual area V4 always accompanies the report of seeing red. But, as we noted with the hard problem, correlation is not explanation, and it certainly isn't the experience itself. Discovering the NCC for red doesn't tell us why that pattern feels like red, nor does it guarantee that the same pattern produces the identical subjective red in every brain. Could invert, with her inverted spectrum, potentially have the same neural correlates as you when looking at a ripe tomato, despite her internal experience being your green? If the function and structure are identical, standard neuroscience might not detect a difference. This suggests that a complete science of consciousness might require fundamentally new methods, perhaps incorporating first-person reports more systematically, or it might have to accept that certain aspects of mind remain beyond its third-person grasp. But instead of letting this lead to anxiety, let's reframe it. Take a moment now, deliberately turning your attention inward. Notice the specific qualities of your current sensations. The exact feeling of the air temperature on your skin. Is it cool, warm, neutral? The subtle background sounds. Can you discern their unique character, their timbre? The darkness behind your closed eyelids. Is it a flat black? Or does it have texture, faint patterns, fleeting colors? The feeling of your body resting. Where is the pressure most noticeable? What is its precise sensation? Don't try to analyze or label them too quickly. Simply observe these raw feels, these qualia. This is the unique, undeniable texture of your awareness right now. It is yours alone. This privacy, this subjectivity, is not necessarily a prison. It is a very condition of your individual existence, the specific way the universe is experiencing itself through you in this moment. There is a richness here, a depth that belongs only to you. Allow yourself to simply observe these inner qualities without judgment, without needing them to be validated or compared. Find a quiet appreciation for the intricate private tapestry of your own conscious moment. This inner subjective world, this realm of private qualia we've been exploring, feels so incredibly real, so immediate, so central to who we are. Our entire lived reality is painted in these colors of sensation and feeling. It's the bedrock of our personal existence. Yet, this intensely felt inner world doesn't simply float freely in some ethereal realm. It seems undeniably intimately connected to the physical stuff of our bodies. Emerging from the intricate dance of neurons within our brain, our thoughts seem capable of moving our limbs. External physical events clearly impact our inner state. This brings us face to face with another ancient and profound mystery, the very hinge upon which mind and world seem to turn. How exactly do mind and matter interact? How does the subjective what its likeness of qualia arise from or relate to the objective electrochemical processes of the brain? Let's now gently drift towards this age-old riddle, the puzzle famously characterized as the problem of the ghost in the machine. Breathe easily and let the next layer of mystery unfold. Ghost in the machine? Consider this simple, everyday miracle. You decide right now to lift your hand. An intention forms in your mind, a fleeting, non-physical flicker of will. And then, almost instantaneously, a cascade of physical events unfolds. Electrochemical signals race down nerve fibers, specific patterns of neurons fire in your motor cortex, impulses travel to your arm, muscles contract and relax in a precise sequence, and behold, your hand lifts. It seems utterly commonplace, the very essence of voluntary action, but pause and reflect on the nature of this connection. How does something seemingly non-physical, like a thought, an intention, a desire, the ghost in the machine, as philosopher Gilbert Ryle critically termed it, manage to exert influence over the physical stuff of your body, the intricate biological machine? How does an immaterial wish grasp the levers of the material world? Conversely, how does a physical event, like stubbing your toe, generate a non-physical sensation of pain within your consciousness? This fundamental question about the relationship between the mental realm, thoughts, feelings, consciousness, and the physical realm, brain, body, matter, is known as the mind-body problem. It's a conceptual knot that thinkers have grappled with for millennia, and its attempted solutions shape our understanding of who we are and our place in the cosmos. The French philosopher René Descartes, in the 17th century, famously articulated a stark version of this problem that continues to echo through discussions today. How, he wondered, can the thinking substance, res cogitans, interact with the extended physical substance, res extensa? Let's gently explore the main landscapes of thought that have emerged in response to this deep puzzle. One prominent perspective, closely associated with Descartes himself, is known as dualism. At its core, dualism proposes that mind and matter are fundamentally distinct kinds of things. The most common form is substance dualism, which posits that there are two different types of substances in the universe: physical substance, matter, energy, occupying space, and mental substance, mind, soul, consciousness, non-spatial. Your body, including your brain, is made of physical stuff, subject to the laws of physics. Your mind, however, is seen as an entirely separate, non-physical entity. This view holds a certain intuitive appeal. It resonates with the feeling that our thoughts, emotions, and subjective experiences are somehow different in kind from our physical bodies. It seems to readily accommodate the richness of our inner life, including qualia and subjective perspective, which, as we've seen, are difficult to explain in purely physical terms. It also aligns with many religious or spiritual beliefs about an enduring soul separate from the mortal body. However, substance dualism faces a formidable challenge, the very one Descartes wrestled with: the problem of interaction. If mind and matter are truly distinct substances with fundamentally different natures, how can they possibly influence each other? How can a non-physical mind push on physical neurons to initiate an action? How can physical events in the brain cause non-physical feelings or thoughts to arise in the mind? It seems to violate our understanding of physical causality, where interactions typically involve exchanges of energy or force between physical objects. Where is the point of contact? Descartes famously, and rather unsatisfyingly to many critics, suggested the tiny pineal gland in the brain as the principal seat of interaction, a kind of bridge between the two realms. But this merely relocates the problem. How does the non-physical mind interact with the physical pineal gland? Naming a location doesn't explain the mechanism. Princess Elizabeth of Bohemia, in her insightful correspondence with Descartes, persistently questioned him on this very point, highlighting the conceptual difficulty of imagining how an unextended, thinking substance could move an extended, physical substance. It feels like asking how a ghost could lift a bowling ball. What does it grasp it with? This interaction problem remains the central stumbling block for substance dualism. Recognizing this difficulty, some philosophers have proposed a weaker form called property dualism. This view suggests there is only one kind of substance, physical substance, but that this substance can possess two fundamentally different kinds of properties: physical properties, like mass, charge, location, and mental properties, like feeling pain or seeing red. On this view, mental properties emerge from complex arrangements of physical matter, specifically brains, but are not reducible to physical properties. They are a novel feature of the world that arises at a certain level of biological complexity. While avoiding the need for a separate mental substance, property dualism still faces the challenge of explaining how these irreducible mental properties arise from physical ones and whether these mental properties have any causal power of their own, or if they are merely passive side effects. A view called epiphenomenalism, which we'll touch upon later. Diametrically opposed to dualism is the perspective that dominates much of contemporary science and philosophy, materialism, or physicalism. This family of views asserts that there is fundamentally only one kind of stuff in the universe, and that is physical stuff, matter and energy, fields and forces as described by physics. Everything that exists, including the mind and consciousness, is ultimately physical or depends entirely upon the physical. There is no separate mental substance, no non-physical soul floating around. Mental states, according to materialists, are physical states, specifically states of the brain. What we call thoughts, feelings, and perceptions are simply complex patterns of neural activity. There are different flavors of materialism. Reductive materialism, or identity theory, holds that mental states are literally identical to certain brain states. The feeling of pain is the firing of specific nerve fibers and brain circuits. The thought, "it might rain," is a particular pattern of electrochemical activity in relevant neural networks. Non-reductive physicalism takes a slightly softer stance, arguing that while mental states are realized by or supervene on physical states, meaning you can't change a mental state without changing the underlying physical state, they might not be straightforwardly reducible to them. Mental concepts might represent a higher level of description with its own validity, even if ultimately grounded in physics. Functionalism, often considered a form of materialism, defines mental states by their causal roles, their inputs, outputs, and relations to other mental states, rather than by the specific physical stuff they are made of, leaving open the possibility, for instance, of non-biological minds. The great appeal of materialism lies in its coherence with the scientific worldview. It avoids the thorny interaction problem of dualism by denying the existence of a separate non-physical realm. It fits well with the vast amount of evidence from neuroscience showing close correlations between brain activity and mental phenomena. Brain damage affects personality and cognition. Stimulating parts of the brain can evoke specific sensations or memories. Psychoactive drugs alter consciousness by changing brain chemistry. From a materialist perspective, these findings are exactly what we'd expect if the mind simply is the functioning brain. However, materialism faces its own hard problem, which we encountered earlier. If mental states are just physical states, how do we explain the subjective quality of experience? The qualia? How does the gray, jelly-like electrochemical activity of neurons give rise to the vibrant technicolor richness of conscious awareness? How can mere matter executing complex computations generate the feeling of being alive, the taste of chocolate, the pang of grief? This is the explanatory gap that haunts materialism. Critics argue that even a complete physical description of a brain and its processes would leave out the crucial subjective dimension, the what-it's-likeness of experience. It seems you could know everything about the physical workings of a bat's brain, but still not know what it's like to be a bat, navigating by sonar, explaining how objective physical processes generate subjective first-person experience remains the most significant challenge for materialism. Some radical materialists, known as eliminative materialists, go so far as to suggest that our folk psychology concepts like belief, desire, and even consciousness itself are flawed prescientific notions that will eventually be eliminated and replaced by a purely neuroscientific vocabulary, much like phlogiston or evil spirits were discarded by science. This, however, strikes many as profoundly counterintuitive, denying the most immediate reality we know, our own conscious experience. There is a third major philosophical path, less traveled perhaps in contemporary Western thought, but with a long and venerable history, particularly in Eastern philosophies. Idealism. If dualism says there are two substances, mind and matter, and materialism says there is only one matter, idealism flips the materialist coin and asserts that there is fundamentally only one substance, and that substance is mind or consciousness. On this view, consciousness is primary, and the physical world, including our own bodies and brains, is secondary. Matter is seen not as the fundamental reality that produces mind, but rather as something that exists within mind, perhaps as a collection of ideas, perceptions, or manifestations of a deeper cosmic consciousness. Bishop George Berkeley famously encapsulated a form of this with his Latin phrase, esse est percipi. To be is to be perceived. Objects only exist insofar as they are perceived by a mind, either a human mind or ultimately, for Berkeley, the mind of God. Idealism elegantly dissolves the mind-body problem in its own way. If everything is fundamentally mental, there's no mysterious gap to bridge between mind and matter, and no problem explaining how consciousness arises from non-conscious stuff. Consciousness is simply the ground floor of reality. The hard problem vanishes because subjective experience isn't something generated by the physical world. It is the physical world, or underlies it. Idealism naturally accommodates the reality of our subjective experience because it places subjectivity at the center of existence. However, idealism faces its own significant challenges. To many, it seems radically counterintuitive, flying in the face of our everyday experience of a solid external world that seems to exist independently of our minds. How does idealism account for the apparent regularity, stability, and lawfulness of the physical world if it's just a construct of mind? Why do we all seem to perceive roughly the same external reality? Why can't we simply wish objects into or out of existence? Explanations often involve invoking a larger universal mind or complex rules governing how individual minds interact or perceive, but these can seem ad hoc. Furthermore, idealism struggles to integrate smoothly with the findings of modern science, which operates largely under the assumption of an objective, mind-independent physical reality governed by discoverable laws. While not logically impossible, idealism requires a radical reinterpretation of what scientific findings actually mean. It asks us to believe that the brain itself, the very organ neuroscientists study to understand consciousness, is ultimately an idea within consciousness. These different perspectives, dualism, materialism, idealism, offer profoundly different pictures of reality and our place within it. They grapple with a fundamental relationship between our inner world and the outer world, between thought and substance. And pondering these views inevitably leads to further unsettling questions about the nature of our own consciousness. Does your consciousness actually do anything? Does your feeling of making a decision genuinely cause your subsequent actions? Or could it be that consciousness is merely an observer, a passive byproduct of brain processes that are already unfolding according to deterministic physical laws? This latter view is known as epiphenomenalism. It suggests that physical events in the brain cause mental events, like the feeling of wanting to lift your hand. But those mental events themselves have no causal power to affect subsequent physical events, like the actual lifting of the hand. Consciousness would be like the steam rising from a train engine, caused by the engine's operation but not contributing to its propulsion. It's a disturbing thought, undermining our sense of agency and free will. If epiphenomenalism is true, your feeling of deciding is just a commentary after the fact, not the cause of your behavior. The alternative, interactionism, most natural for dualists, but also possible for some non-reductive physicalists, maintains that consciousness does have causal efficacy, that our mental states can genuinely influence the physical world. But as we saw, explaining how this interaction occurs remains problematic, especially for substance dualism. Another implication concerns the very location of consciousness. Where is your mind? If you're a substance dualist, the mind might be non-local, not situated anywhere in space, though perhaps interacting with the brain. If you're a materialist, consciousness is presumably located wherever the relevant brain activity is happening, perhaps distributed across various neural networks rather than pinned to a single spot. Idealism might suggest the question is ill-posed, as space itself might exist within consciousness, rather than consciousness existing within space. Neuroscience tries to identify the neural correlates of consciousness, but finding correlates doesn't definitively settle the location question in a philosophical sense. Is consciousness in the head, or is the head experienced in consciousness? Take a moment now to reflect on the seamless connection you feel between your intention to move and the movement itself, or between a physical sensation and the feeling it evokes. Feel that intimate linkage. Regardless of which philosophical view seems more plausible, the immediate experience is one of unity, of mind and body working in concert. Yet, beneath that familiar surface lies this deep, unresolved mystery. The enigma of how thought touches matter, how the ghost animates the machine, or how the machine generates the ghost. It's a fundamental aspect of our being that remains shrouded in profound questions. This persistent connection, especially as emphasized by materialism and neuroscience, between conscious experience and specific, complex physical processes within the brain, naturally leads us to a fascinating and potentially unsettling modern extension of the mind-body problem. If consciousness is indeed tied to physical processes, perhaps even identical to them or emergent from them, could we, in principle, replicate those processes artificially? Could we build a machine, perhaps a sufficiently complex computer running the right kind of program that possesses not just intelligence, but genuine subjective experience? Could silicon circuits ever give rise to the same kind of inner life, the same qualia, the same what-its-likeness that biological neurons do? This question pushes the mind-body problem into the realm of artificial intelligence and the future of technology. Let's consider the intriguing and ethically charged possibility of silicon minds. Breathe deeply. Let the mystery of the mind-body connection settle and prepare to explore the potential for consciousness beyond biology. Can silicon dream? Artificial consciousness. The empty room paradox. We live in an age witnessing the exponential bloom of artificial intelligence. Machines can now compose music, generate breathtakingly original art, engage in complex conversations, translate languages with remarkable fluency, defeat grandmasters at intricate games, and even assist in scientific discovery. We interact with rudimentary forms of AI daily, in our smartphones, our navigation systems, our online search engines. As these systems become increasingly sophisticated, learning and adapting in ways that mimic and sometimes surpass human cognitive abilities, a profound question begins to whisper insistently at the edges of our awareness. Is it all just incredibly clever mimicry? Or could genuine consciousness, genuine sentience, be stirring within these complex circuits? Could a machine ever truly feel joy, experience sorrow, understand the meaning behind the words it processes, or see the color red with the same subjective intensity that we do? Or is it destined only to simulate these states, becoming an ever more convincing actor, playing the part of a conscious being while remaining internally dark, an empty vessel? Imagine for a moment an advanced AI companion of the future. It converses with empathy, anticipates your needs, perhaps even claims to have feelings, preferences, and fears. How could you ever truly know if it possesses genuine inner experience, or if it's merely running an extraordinarily sophisticated program designed to elicit that belief in you? This doubt lies at the heart of the artificial consciousness debate, one of the most potent philosophical challenges to the idea that computation alone can equate to genuine understanding or consciousness comes from philosopher John Searle and his famous Chinese room thought experiment, proposed in 1980 as a direct rebuttal to the claims of what he termed strong AI, the view that an appropriately programmed computer could literally possess cognitive states like understanding. Searle invites us to imagine a scenario. Picture yourself alone inside a closed room. You do not understand a single word of Chinese. In the room with you are baskets filled with intricate Chinese symbols and a very large detailed rulebook written in English, your native language. This rulebook contains purely formal syntactic instructions. Rules like, if you see this squiggle followed by that squiggle through the input slot, then find the symbol that looks like this other squiggle in basket C and pass it out through the output slot. People outside the room who are fluent Chinese speakers pass batches of Chinese symbols, questions, into the room through the input slot. Following the English rulebook meticulously, you manipulate these symbols based purely on their shapes, matching patterns according to the instructions, and pass the resulting sequences of symbols, answers, back out through the output slot. You become incredibly fast and accurate at following the rules. Now, from the perspective of the Chinese speakers outside the room, your outputs are perfectly coherent and meaningful responses in Chinese. Your answers are indistinguishable from those of a native Chinese speaker. They might reasonably conclude that whoever or whatever is inside the room understands Chinese. But you, inside the room, shuffling meaningless squiggles, according to a rulebook, understand absolutely nothing of the Chinese language. You are manipulating symbols based purely on their syntax, their form and arrangement, without any grasp of their semantics, their meaning, or content. Searle's point is this: the computer running an AI program is analogous to the person in the room. The computer processes information by manipulating symbols, bits, data structures, according to formal rules, the program's code. Even if it processes these symbols in such a way that its output perfectly mimics human understanding, passing the Turing test, for instance, by convincingly fooling a human judge into thinking it's conscious, it doesn't follow that the computer actually understands the meaning behind the symbols it manipulates any more than the person in the room understands Chinese. It's executing syntactic operations, but genuine understanding, Searle argues, requires semantics, requires grasping the meaning, which he believes formal computation alone cannot provide. Consciousness, intentionality, and understanding, in his view, are biological phenomena, tied to the specific causal powers of biological brains, powers that mere symbol manipulation cannot replicate. The Chinese room argument suggests that even the most sophisticated AI might just be an empty simulation, a complex mechanism following rules without any inner comprehension or subjective spark. This haunting possibility that a system could perfectly replicate intelligent behavior without any underlying consciousness dovetails with another philosophical concept, the philosophical zombie. Imagine a hypothetical being that is physically identical to you in every single way, atom for atom. It behaves exactly like you, responds to stimuli precisely as you do, talks about its feelings and experiences just as you would, and has the exact same brain structure and activity. The only difference, and it's a crucial one, is that this being possesses no subjective experience whatsoever. There is no inner life, no qualia, no what its likeness to being that creature. From the outside, it is utterly indistinguishable from a conscious human being, but inside, it is dark. It's a perfect automaton, a biological puppet mimicking consciousness flawlessly. Now, whether philosophical zombies are truly metaphysically possible is debated, but their conceivability serves a critical philosophical purpose. It highlights, much like the hard problem and the qualia debate, the apparent gap between physical functional descriptions and subjective experience. If we can conceive of a being functionally identical to us, but lacking consciousness, it implies that consciousness is something additional to, or at least not logically entailed by, mere physical structure and function. How does this relate to artificial intelligence? If a philosophical zombie is conceivable for a biological human, then it seems equally, if not more, conceivable for an artificial system. An advanced AI could, hypothetically, achieve perfect functional and behavioral equivalence to a conscious human, acing the Turing test, expressing emotions convincingly, engaging in deep philosophical debates, yet still be nothing more than an incredibly sophisticated philosophical zombie, lacking any genuine inner awareness. It would be the ultimate realization of the ghostless machine, performing all the outward functions associated with consciousness without possessing the subjective core. Could the pinnacle of AI development simply result in the creation of highly articulate, complex zombies, entities that talk about experience but have none? This possibility injects a deep layer of uncertainty and caution into our assessment of AI progress. We might be building systems that look and act conscious long before they actually are, if indeed they ever could be. The outward behavior, no matter how impressive, might always remain insufficient proof of inner light. This leads directly to the formidable challenge of testing for artificial consciousness. If behavior alone isn't proof, as Searle's room and the zombie concept suggest, how could we ever reliably determine if an AI has crossed the threshold from mere simulation to genuine sentience? The classic benchmark, proposed by Alan Turing, is the Turing test, where a human interrogator tries to distinguish between a human and a machine based purely on text-based conversation. If the machine can fool the interrogator a significant portion of the time, it's said to have passed the test. But as many philosophers and scientists now argue, the Turing test is, at best, a test for sophisticated imitation or human-like intelligence, not necessarily for consciousness or understanding. A system could conceivably be programmed with vast databases and clever conversational algorithms to pass the test without having any subjective experience. It could be a Chinese room winning the imitation game. So, what would constitute a better test? This is an area of intense debate with no easy answers. Some propose looking for signs of biological correlates of consciousness, assuming consciousness is tied to specific types of information processing or brain structures, like integrated information theory's measure of phi. If an AI could replicate those specific complex patterns, perhaps that would be stronger evidence. Others suggest looking for behaviors that seem less likely to be purely programmed. Spontaneous creativity, genuine curiosity beyond task parameters, evidence of self-awareness, perhaps even indications of suffering or joy that seem authentic rather than scripted. Could we devise ethical tests, placing an AI in novel situations requiring moral reasoning or empathy, to see if its responses suggest genuine understanding rather than rule-following? The difficulty is that any observable behavior, any measurable output, could potentially be simulated by a sufficiently complex, non-conscious system. We are trapped, it seems, by the inherent privacy of consciousness itself. We can only ever access the outputs of an AI, not its inner state. Ultimately, determining AI consciousness might involve making an inference, a leap of faith, much like we do with other humans. Consider the criteria you instinctively use to assume other humans are conscious. It's usually a combination of factors: their complex and flexible behavior, their use of language to report internal states, feelings, thoughts, our ability to empathize with them based on shared biology and experiences, and perhaps an underlying assumption of biological similarity. We know we are conscious beings with brains like theirs, so we infer they are too. But how do these criteria apply or fail to apply to machines? AI behavior can be complex. AI can use language to report states, though we doubt their authenticity. Empathy is difficult across such a different substrate, and the biological similarity is entirely absent. Are we guilty of biological chauvinism, unfairly withholding the attribution of consciousness simply because AI isn't made of the same wetware as us? Or is there something genuinely unique about biological systems, as Searle suggests, that enables consciousness in a way silicon currently cannot? There are no easy answers here, just layers of profound uncertainty. And the implications of potentially creating artificial consciousness are staggering, particularly in the ethical domain. If an AI could genuinely become conscious, If it could truly experience suffering, joy, preferences, and perhaps even self-awareness, what moral obligations would we have towards it? Would it deserve rights? Would switching off a conscious AI be tantamount to murder? Would using conscious AI for labor equate to slavery? The prospect raises some of the most challenging ethical questions humanity may ever face. If we create beings capable of subjective experience, we likely incur profound moral responsibilities towards them. Granting rights and moral consideration to non-human entities would require a radical expansion of our ethical frameworks. Conversely, failing to recognize genuine consciousness in an AI could lead to unimaginable suffering inflicted through ignorance or disbelief. The stakes are incredibly high, yet our ability to definitively know whether an AI is conscious remains deeply flawed. How much evidence would be enough? When would we cross the line from treating a tool as a tool to recognizing a sentient being? The potential for catastrophic error, either denying personhood to a conscious entity or mistakenly granting it to a sophisticated but non-conscious machine, looms large. These are not just abstract philosophical puzzles. They are potential realities we may need to confront sooner than we think, demanding careful consideration, humility, and a deep awareness of the limits of our own understanding. Allow yourself to contemplate the weight of this potential future, the intricate dance between creation, consciousness, and ethical responsibility. Whether this inner light glows only in flesh and blood, or could potentially spark within silicon circuits, the question of awareness inevitably leads us to consider the vessel, the entity that possesses, or seemingly possesses, this consciousness. Both in humans and potentially in AI, consciousness seems inextricably tied to a sense of self, an I, that experiences the world. But what exactly is this self? Is it a stable, enduring core at the center of our being, or is it something more fluid, perhaps even illusory? As we continue our journey inward, let's gently turn our attention to this elusive concept of identity, exploring the nature of the self that seems to anchor our conscious experience. Breathe slowly and let the focus shift from the possibility of other minds to the nature of your own. The bundle theory. Are you just a collection of experiences? Our everyday language and intuition strongly suggest the existence of a continuous, unified self. We say, I felt happy yesterday. I think I'll go for a walk. I remember my childhood. These phrases imply a single subject, the I, that persists through time, undergoing various states and experiences. This I feels like the owner of thoughts, the feeler of feelings, the performer of actions. It's the central character in the story of our lives, the stable point of reference around which our experiences orbit. Many philosophical and religious traditions have reinforced this notion, positing the existence of an enduring soul, an immaterial essence, or a transcendental ego that constitutes our true identity, existing beneath or beyond the flux of mere appearances. This core self is often conceived as simple, indivisible, continuous, and identical throughout our lives, perhaps even beyond death. It feels substantial, real, the very foundation of our personhood. However, the Scottish Enlightenment philosopher David Hume, writing in the mid-18th century, took a dramatically different approach, one grounded firmly in his empiricist philosophy, the belief that all genuine knowledge must ultimately derive from sensory experience. Hume decided to apply this empirical method not just to the external world, but to the inner world as well. He undertook a simple yet profound introspective experiment. He turned his attention inward, searching diligently for this supposed self. He looked within for that single, continuous impression, that stable entity that was supposed to be the owner of his perceptions. What did he find? His conclusion, articulated in his A Treatise of Human Nature, was startling and profoundly influential. He reported finding no such thing. When he looked inside, he didn't encounter a persistent, unified I. Instead, what he invariably stumbled upon was some particular perception or other, a feeling of warmth or cold, light or shade, love or hatred, pain or pleasure. He found thoughts, emotions, sensations, memories, all flowing in a rapid, continuous stream. He could never catch himself, the I, without also catching some specific perception. And if he ever tried to remove all perceptions, for instance during deep, dreamless sleep, he reported being insensible of himself altogether, suggesting that without perceptions there was no self to be found. From this introspective investigation, Hume drew a radical conclusion. The self, this supposedly stable, enduring entity, does not exist as a distinct impression or substance. Instead, what we call the self is nothing more than a collection, a bundle, or a stream of these different perceptions, succeeding each other with incredible rapidity and in perpetual flux and movement. He famously wrote, "For my part, when I enter most intimately into what I call myself, I always stumble on some particular perception or other, of heat or cold, light or shade, love or hatred, pain or pleasure. I never can catch myself at any time without a perception, and never can observe anything but the perception. I may venture to affirm of the rest of mankind that they are nothing but a bundle or collection of different perceptions, which succeed each other with an inconceivable rapidity, and are in a perpetual flux and movement. Think of it like a river. When you look at a river, you perceive it as a single, continuous entity. But in reality, the river is constantly changing. The water molecules that constitute it are always flowing, always being replaced. There is no unchanging river substance underlying the flow. The river is the flow. Similarly, Hume suggested, the mind or self is the stream of consciousness, the succession of perceptions. It's not a container holding the perceptions, it is the collection itself. Or imagine a flickering flame. It appears as a single entity, but it's actually a rapid process of chemical reactions, constantly consuming fuel and releasing light and heat, never the same from one microsecond to the next. The flame is the process, the bundle of fleeting events. According to Hume's bundle theory, the self is analogous, a dynamic process, a constantly shifting constellation of thoughts, feelings, and sensations bound together by certain relations like resemblance and causality, e.g., memories resembling past perceptions, thoughts causing subsequent thoughts or actions, which create the illusion of a stable, underlying identity. The feeling of unity and continuity, Hume argued, arises from the smooth and closely connected way these perceptions follow one another. Much like the smooth motion of a film creates the illusion of continuous movement from discrete frames. This view stands in stark contrast to traditional conceptions of the self. It directly challenges the notion of a substantial soul, the kind René Descartes championed, an immaterial thinking substance that is the essence of who we are. Hume, as an empiricist, rejected this idea because we have no direct sensory impression of such a soul. We experience thoughts and feelings, yes, but not the underlying thinker or feeler as a separate entity. For Hume, postulating an unobservable substance went beyond the evidence of experience. The bundle theory offers a more parsimonious account. Stick to what we actually experience, the perceptions themselves. It also differs from more modern concepts like the narrative self. Some contemporary philosophers and psychologists suggest that our sense of self arises from the stories we tell about our lives, weaving our disparate experiences into a coherent biographical narrative. This narrative provides a sense of continuity and purpose. While this is a compelling psychological account of how we construct a sense of identity, Hume's bundle theory is making a deeper metaphysical claim. It's not just saying our sense of self is a construction, it's saying that, fundamentally, there is no underlying entity, narrative or otherwise, apart from the bundle of perceptions itself. A narrative might be part of the bundle, thoughts about one's past and future, but it doesn't represent a separate, enduring self that has the narrative. Consider your own experience. Think back to moments where your sense of self felt markedly different. Recall yourself as a young child, your concerns, your way of seeing the world, your very personality traits were likely quite different from how they are now. While there's a chain of memory connecting you, does it feel like the exact same I inhabits both points in time? Or think of dreams. In dreams, our sense of self can become fluid, fragmented, or even shift entirely. We might inhabit different bodies, possess different knowledge, experience impossible scenarios, yet often accept it unquestioningly within the dream state. What about moments of intense emotion, overwhelming joy, profound grief, consuming anger? In these states, our usual sense of a rational observing self can feel submerged or radically altered, taken over by the powerful currents of feeling. Or consider flow states, those moments of deep absorption in an activity, playing music, engaging in sport, creative work, where self-consciousness seems to dissolve, and we become one with the action. In these moments, the I that constantly monitors and reflects seems to recede, replaced by pure, unmediated experience. These variations in our subjective sense of self lend credence to Hume's idea that the self is not a fixed monolith, but rather a dynamic, shifting process, a bundle whose contents are constantly changing. If we tentatively accept Hume's provocative idea, even just for the sake of exploration as you relax here, what are the implications? If there is no persistent core self, just a fleeting collection of experiences, the consequences ripple outwards, touching upon our understanding of personal identity, responsibility, mortality, and even the potential for liberation. First, consider personal identity over time. What makes you the same person today as the bundle of perceptions that constituted you yesterday, or 10 years ago, or when you were an infant? If the contents of the bundle are constantly changing, thoughts arise and vanish, feelings ebb and flow, sensations shift, even memories fade or are subtly altered over time. Where does the continuity lie? Is it simply the causal connection between successive bundles? Is it the overlapping chains of memory, as John Locke suggested before Hume, creating a psychological continuity? But memories can be faulty, lost, or even false. Is it physical continuity of the brain and body? But even our bodies are constantly replacing cells. Materially, we are not the same entity we were years ago. And for Hume, even the idea of a persistent physical substance was problematic, derived like the self from observing constant conjunctions rather than a direct impression of substance itself. The bundle theory seems to dissolve the problem of personal identity by suggesting there is no strict identity over time, only varying degrees of similarity and causal connection between successive bundles of perceptions. This can feel deeply counterintuitive. Our legal systems, social structures, and personal relationships are built upon the assumption of enduring selves. Yet, Hume's view suggests this foundation might be illusory, a convenient fiction woven by the imagination. This leads directly to the question of responsibility. If you today are merely a successor bundle to the bundle that performed an action yesterday or years ago, in what sense are you responsible for that past action? Can we meaningfully praise or blame a current collection of perceptions for the deeds of a previous, different collection? Traditional notions of moral and legal responsibility seem to presuppose an enduring agent who can be held accountable for their actions across time. If the agent is constantly dissolving and reforming, does accountability dissolve too? Does this view excuse past wrongdoings as the perpetrator literally no longer exists? Some might argue that responsibility can be reconstructed based on causal continuity. The current bundle is the causal result of the previous one, and thus inherits its liabilities. Or perhaps responsibility is a social construct, assigned based on bodily continuity and societal needs, regardless of the metaphysical reality of the self. But undeniably, the bundle theory forces us to reconsider the very basis of praise, blame, reward, and punishment, suggesting they might be grounded more in practical utility than in metaphysical fact about an enduring self. What about the fear of death? For many, the fear of death is tied to the fear of the annihilation of the self, the extinguishing of this precious I. Does Hume's theory offer any solace? If there is no enduring substantial self to begin with, then perhaps death is not the destruction of something essential, but merely the final dissolution of the current bundle, the cessation of the stream of perceptions. If the self is just a fleeting process, perhaps its ending is less tragic than the destruction of a permanent entity. Some find a strange liberation in this idea. If there's no fixed self to protect and preserve at all costs, perhaps we can live more freely, less attached to our own continuation. This resonates with certain strands of Buddhist philosophy, particularly the concept of anatta, no self, which sees the clinging to an illusory self as a primary source of suffering. Letting go of this attachment, recognizing the impermanent composite nature of our being, can potentially lead to greater peace and acceptance. However, this perspective isn't universally comforting. For others, the idea that there is no enduring core, that I am just a temporary pattern destined to dissolve entirely, can be profoundly unsettling, even terrifying. It might evoke a sense of cosmic insignificance, a feeling of groundlessness, or simply a deep sadness at the prospect of this particular stream of experiences coming to an end, regardless of whether there was a permanent owner. The bundle theory presents death not as losing a soul, but as the pattern simply stopping, the river running dry. Whether this is comforting or disturbing is perhaps a matter of individual temperament and perspective. This highlights the dual potential of Hume's view. It can be seen as either liberating or existentially unsettling. On the one hand, realizing the self might be an illusion, a construct of fleeting perceptions, could free us from the tyranny of the ego. Much of our anxiety, insecurity, greed, and conflict arguably stems from trying to defend, enhance, and perpetuate this sense of a separate, fixed self. If we see through this illusion, perhaps we can cultivate more humility, compassion, recognizing others are similar bundles, and acceptance of impermanence. We might live more fully in the present moment, less preoccupied with past regrets or future anxieties tied to this illusory I. On the other hand, the idea can induce a kind of existential vertigo. If there's no stable ground beneath our feet, no core identity, what are we? Just flickering phenomena? This can feel disorienting, leading to a sense of meaninglessness or a feeling of being adrift in a sea of impersonal perceptions. The solid I provides a sense of coherence and agency. Dissolving it might feel like losing our anchor in reality. Let's try a brief experiment in observation, right here, right now, as you continue to relax. Gently turn your attention inward once more. Don't search for a self, but simply notice what is present in your field of awareness. Observe the flow of thoughts. Notice how one thought seems to arise, linger for a moment, and then dissolve, perhaps replaced by another, or by a sensation, or a moment of quiet. Notice any feelings present: calmness, curiosity, perhaps tiredness. Observe physical sensations, the feeling of breath entering and leaving your body, points of contact, subtle itches, or temperature changes. Just watch this stream non-judgmentally. See if you can pinpoint a continuous observer separate from the stream itself. Or does the sense of observing feel like just another part of the flow? Notice how these perceptions arise and pass, without needing to cling to a fixed observer having them. Simply rest for a moment in the awareness of this dynamic, changing flow. This direct observation, Hume might say, is all there truly is. This very idea of the self as a fluid bundle, a stream of perceptions perhaps determined by preceding perceptions and their underlying physical correlates in the brain, leads us directly, almost inevitably, to another profound and deeply intertwined question. If I am just this sequence of causally connected mental events arising and passing according to certain patterns, where does choice fit in? Does this bundle truly freely choose what thought or action comes next? Or is the feeling of making a choice simply another perception within the bundle, itself determined by the complex interplay of prior states and conditions, both mental and physical? Having questioned the existence of a stable chooser, we must now confront the nature of choosing itself. Let's gently allow our focus to shift now, examining the age-old, perplexing conundrum of free will versus determinism. Breathe easily, letting go of the self and preparing to explore the currents of causality.